What's shaking, cocktail fans? I'm Modern Bar Cart CEO Eric Kozlik. This time, my travels bring me to Blagden Alley in Washington, D.C. I'm headed to a bar called the Columbia Room, where I'll interview this guy, the owner, Derek Brown. He and his co-author Bob Yule recently published a book called Spirits, Sugar, Water, Bitters: How the Cocktail Conquered the World. Our task today is to dig into this fantastic new cocktail history text and share its secrets with you. Derek and Bob, thanks for being on the podcast.
Our pleasure to be here.
Thanks for having us.
So can you each introduce yourself to our listeners and just give us a brief bio of who Derek and Bob are?
Sure. You want to go first, Bob?
Sure. So I came from a background in journalism, worked for a Japanese newspaper for quite a while, the Asahi Shimbun, covering U.S. politics from a Japanese perspective here in D.C. So sort of odd beginnings, but went into nonprofit communications, sort of global health, and then found my way to a production company. So I work for Long Story Short Media. Also been a tour guide in DC for about the past 20 years. So that's one of my sort of odd side jobs.
Yeah, Garrett Peck, who's also been on the podcast, is also a tour guide.
Big fan.
He's
fantastic. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
At one point, I had the record of going on the most Garrett Peck tours. I've been on 7. So.
Nice.
That's fantastic. Derek, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Derek Brown, and I am the owner of this bar that we're in, the Columbia Room. I write on cocktails and spirits. I guess I'm ostensibly a spirits and cocktails expert. And I wrote this book with Bob called Spirits, Sugar, Water, Bitters: How the Cocktail Conquered the World.
Yeah, and that's going to be the focus of our interview today. I'm sure that we're going to get into some other things. But before we dive into the book too far, I guess let's talk about how each of you found your way into the cocktail world, because I have a feeling it's somewhat different stories here.
Yeah, and actually that's one of the reasons why it was so fortuitous that we did this together, I think, because it is mostly from my perspective. But one of the great things about having Bob writing it with me is that I got to see some of the outside perspective as well. Somebody who isn't necessarily a bartender or working within the cocktail industry, somebody who had a little different take. And so, yeah, that's been great to help, I think, convey the information that we had to in a fairly breezy format.
Sure. Yeah. And it's tough in the cocktail history world, right? Because you're necessarily, poking the Wondrich bear.
Yeah, I like to address this right off the bat. I'm not a historian, and I was very clear in here. In fact, I almost feel like in one page, I'm just like, all this information could be wrong. I don't know. You'll find out later. So, I did my best, and we did our best to make this information correct. But yeah, I'm not a historian. So.
Yeah, but you are a practitioner. So can you tell us how you kind of worked your way up through various bar programs here in DC? Just give us the short version, and we can, I guess, dive deeper as the chance arises.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of started out as a shiftless loser. I had no idea what I was going to do. And I started working in restaurants and bars. In fact, I had been working in restaurants and bars since I was 16, but I started to take it seriously, and I became a bartender, and I really loved it. And then from there, I became a sommelier and started working in management. I remember very well the day that I moved from a bartender to a bar manager, and rest in peace, Mike Tilch, who was a great wine connoisseur in the area and ran a wine store, told me, he's like, it's a real shame when a bartender becomes a manager. and I felt really bad about that. But I started doing wine and management, and then decided to go back behind the bar and do more with that, starting the program at the Gibson long time ago. And then opening the Passenger and the Columbia Room. And the Columbia Room now is, it's been around since 2012.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, correction. It's been around since 2010. So technically, 2020 will be its 10 years of existence.
Wow.
1 year we weren't open. We moved spaces from the old space to the new space.
Right.
But we've been around for 10 years.
Still in the Shaw neighborhood as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Bob, how about you? How'd you get into the cocktail space?
So I kind of came to it from the drinking perspective, from the other side of the bar. And I basically learned how to drink in Derek's bars. So the DB3, as they used to call them, for Southern Efficiency, Mockingbird Hill, and Eat the Rich. That's 2 blocks from my house, and we'd go there all the time. And I sort of came at from the history perspective as well, because I'm sort of a history geek. And for me, this was a window into a historical kind of culinary world that I knew nothing about. And that was very rich and kind of woven into the culture of the country. And yet I was still drinking pretty poorly and not taking advantage of all that. And so I like to think I learned how to drink better. And that was for the past 10 years or so. It kind of coincided with the cocktail revival in DC. And so I was lucky to benefit from that and really learn a lot. And I think going to classes, Museum of American Cocktail, classes taught by Derek, by Phil Green, by others coming through DC, it was a great education into the cocktail world.
Right. Let's fast forward to that, because in the book you mention that sort of 10 class series almost as being kind of a bit of a precursor to the book. And that's kind of where you two came together a little bit. So can we talk about that series that you did?
Yeah, there was in 2015, there at the National Archives, they had the Spirited Republic, which was an exhibit that showcased alcohol in American life from the founding of the Republic to the present day. And it was really a great exhibit, except they were missing one thing. They didn't have anything about cocktails in it. So they talked to me and asked me if I would like to be a part of it in some way, not in terms of necessarily creating the exhibit, but maybe creating some kind of addendum to it around cocktails. And I thought that was a great idea. So we created the history of the cocktail series that went along with it, where we had 30 different experts from like Dale DeGroff, Julie Reiner, David Wondrich, Charles Joly, all kinds of people come in and talk about the history of cocktails. There were journalists, there were Robert Simonson from the New York Times, there were bartenders, there were distillers, there were historians, and we just got together and we talked about it. And it was amazing. It was something around like the 8th or 9th seminar where somebody asked, like, where do I get this information? Like, it's amazing. Where have you recorded it? And it was like, well, fuck, And so I think that was when I started the seed of we should, write a book about it. And Bob was one of the few people. There was like 4, right? Mm-hmm. I can't remember, but few people who attended all of them. And I don't really remember everything that was said, frankly. And so I couldn't tell. It wasn't a faithful retelling. Do you know that song? This is the greatest tribute.
Yes.
Song to the greatest song, or this is by who? What is it? Jack White or Jack?
Tenacious D.
Tenacious D.
Yeah. That's your new nickname.
Jack Black. Jack White. Jack Black. Yes. So this is the Tenacious D version of cocktail history, and so. I think we remembered a lot of it. I think a lot of the information came out, and what was great is we saw a narrative weave throughout it, and we were happy to present that.
It's a little difficult. There were 3 cocktails served right before you could bring it in. You're actually drinking in the archive, so I think that's why some of our memories were a little bit dimmed, because by the end of it, everybody was a little bit lit. But it was kind of amazing. You're actually drinking like near the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence.
Right.
And if you after they were held on like Sundays in the afternoon, if you'd go that evening to one of Derek's bars, you would see Dale DeGroff, Julie Reiner, Phil Green, Dave Wondrich, and if you just knew who they were, they would be sitting right next to you. It was kind of an amazing
exactly
thing.
Yeah, that sounds like an amazing experience. One of the things that I like about the book, let me tell you what I really appreciate about the book, and then maybe we can get into some of the nuts and bolts of putting it together and some of the information. Now, of course, this is a history book, and so it's not like we can just walk through this, because then people aren't going to want to go out and buy it. Right. So I don't want to spoil the entire game, but I do want to tell people what I appreciate about this book relative to some of the other texts that are out there, because to be honest, when I found out that it was a history book, I was like, oh great, like another one of these. And so as I read through it, there were some things that really jumped out at me, and You mentioned a moment ago that you started seeing some patterns, and the way that I think about those is almost like echoes. And I was actually talking to some of your bartenders out there about the new menu here at the Columbia Room, which is so bad it's good.
Yep.
Some of these really bad cocktails from the 70s, 80s, early 90s. And what we were saying is like, well, it's we're coming back to that and trying to see what was good and what can we make better now. We're experiencing echoes in that way. And one echo was right in one of the early chapters we talked about peach brandy and its importance in the colonies. And you said it's not like George Washington was drinking sex on the beach.
Right.
He was it was a very different thing, and yet then in the second part of the 20th century, all of a sudden we have peach schnapps and it changes the game, but it's an echo. And so to me, a lot of the value in reading this book was connecting those dots, and I think there's a lucidity to it and a self-consciousness to the book that's different than the Dave Wondrich self-conscious. Dave Wondrich likes to kind of poke fun and poke holes, and I think when you do that in the book, when you're identifying trends that maybe were like the vodka martini, we spent a lot of time, and you're very careful to let the air out of that one in very strategic ways, but it's still really valuable. So I guess to me, the one real big takeaway was the echoes, and then being able to zoom out and really connect those dots, not just from like one part of the 20th century or pre-prohibition to now, but like stretching back to like before the colonies were even a thing. And I came out of the book, I think, a much better thinker in a big picture sense as a result.
Yeah, and an argument for why the history, why this was needed, is because we do have actually some great history of cocktails and some great writers. David Wondrich was one, Wayne Curtis is another. They're out, Robert Simonson's book on the contemporary cocktail movement, but none of them pull it together. There's no textbook, if you will. If you're going to teach a class on the history of the cocktail, and I actually just found out our book is going to be included in a Yale course, which is great.
Fantastic.
Then this is the book. Obviously I admit I'm not a strict historian, nor am I dispassionate in this, right? Like you're talking about the vodka martini.
Right.
I didn't make any bones about it. I don't like that drink in comparison to the gin martini. But I also kind of make these concessions that, well, maybe I was a bit of a jackass when I first started talking about it, but now I'm kind of cool about it. I only think it's like slightly a bad drink.
Yeah. Yeah. Bob, what was your role in the construction of this book? Like, we mentioned that you were kind of the perspective from the other side of the bar. How did that play out when you were constructing the book?
Well, we kind of looked at these eras too, and we divvied them up. And so I've got a big interest in early American history, and so from the founding period to birth of the cocktail, I really kind of wanted to hit those time periods because time I've done a lot of research on as well. So bringing kind of that bit of historic perspective, but then also I think trying to bring it a little bit to a more general audience as well. For me, these are